A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a bar, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and you think, today couldn't possibly get any worse? Well, that was me last Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview for what I thought was my dream position. I'd meticulously prepared for weeks, so naturally, when I bombed the final question, I felt like I'd just thrown my future out the window. As I stared into my glass, feeling sorry for myself, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Facebook message from Rachel, one of my old coworkers. We hadn't spoken since I left that job, and if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't super eager to hear from her. Rachel had a knack for being overly critical. She'd always found a way to step in when she thought I was screwing up, usually in front of the whole team. A real joy at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? So, I hesitated before opening the message. Hey, I just saw your post about that interview. I hope you did well. Just in case you need any references, let me know. Sweet, right? But a part of me stiffened. I didn't want her help. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity of that workplace, and Rachel was absolutely a part of it. Fueled by whiskey, I typed out a response that I probably shouldn't have. Thanks, but I'd prefer not to reach out. You and I never quite saw eye to eye at work. I hit send, taken aback by my own boldness. What was I thinking? The warmth in my cheeks reminded me I was still processing rejection from the interview, and maybe I had a little more to drink than I should have. The reply came quicker than I anticipated. What do you mean? I thought we had a good working relationship. It felt like a slap to the face. Good working relationship? Seriously? Something snapped in me. I was just done. I fired back, honestly, I don't like you, Rachel. We didn't have a good relationship, you constantly made me second guess everything, and frankly, I was relieved when I left. There it was, louder than my own thoughts. After a moment of silence, I realized the bar had gone quiet, and I could feel the eyes from a couple of the patrons on me. Oh great, now I was the spectacle. Rachel didn't retaliate, but her typing dots popped up and disappeared. My stomach twisted. Why had I opened this Pandora's box? Finally, her response was blunt. Wow, I didn't realize I affected you so much. Part of me wanted to take it back, to feign a moment of weakness and resolve it like adults do. But another part wanted to just bask in the clarity of my honesty, even if it terrified me. That night, as I replayed our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and guilt. Maybe I didn't need to have said it in such a public way, but honestly, I had operated under denial for too long, and now the truth was hanging in the air, an exposed nerve I couldn't ignore. In a moment of vulnerable self-reflection, I decided I needed to accept my feelings, however harsh they were. The overwhelming urge to redact was met with a deep-seated understanding. I had finally set a boundary. Fast forward a week, and I learned Rachel had shared our exchange with the whole office, whether out of petty revenge or as some sort of misguided lesson in accountability. The office chatter spiraled, and I became that girl who told off her coworker. It wasn't exactly the outcome I envisioned, but it did bring some clarity. I realized a significant part of my discomfort in the workplace wasn't just Rachel's critiques, but how I allowed her voice to overshadow mine. I had a choice now. I could remain silent about the kind of work environment I wanted, or I could advocate for it fiercely. I chose the latter. Ultimately, it became a turning point. Being honest set me free in ways I didn't expect. Sure, I had momentarily alienated myself from a crowd, perhaps dealing that infamous blow of social discomfort, but sometimes, severing ties is what leads to new beginnings. I sat down at my desk that following Monday, and for the first time, I felt lighter, empowered to not just question but also dictate my worth, and honestly, isn't that what we all strive for after walking away from a toxic environment? In its own way, perhaps I had started stirring the pot, and now my own recipe was coming together. Who knew a drunken confrontation could pave the way for something entirely unexpected? I took a deep breath and settled into that newfound empowerment, my fingers dancing over the keyboard as I tackled emails with a clarity I'd lacked before. The awkwardness from Friday's confrontation still buzzed softly in the back of my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. If anything, it emboldened me to navigate my workday with a sharper sense of who I was and what I wanted. The air felt different, as if I'd shaken off dust that had settled too thickly over the months spent tiptoeing around the opinions of others. Still, it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I glanced up occasionally, my former coworker, Liam, hovering around the break room, bantering with others. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, Some friends avoided his gaze while others awkwardly laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And then there was me, torn between relief and guilt. Yes, I'd said what I had to, but watching him try to fit back into the dynamic with forced smiles tugged at something within me. Was I the one who had thrown the first stone, or had I merely uncovered something that was always rotting beneath the surface? After the day stretched on, I found myself in a meeting where he made a comment that was, quite frankly, absurd. The room contained an array of reactions, nervous giggles, suppressed eye rolls, but I felt it sharper. The urge to call him out again gnawed at my insides, but this time, I held my tongue. The last confrontation had rocked the boat enough. My job wasn't worth the backlash of becoming the office pariah. I decided instead to be the observer, taking mental notes of how people interacted with one another, how toxic conversations shifted like the tides, and recognizing that I was free to swim away from that shoreline. Later, as I was packing up for the day, a nagging thought played in my head: was my confrontation worth the unraveling it caused? It felt good to speak my truth, but I didn't want to spiral into another black hole of conflict. I let it roll around for the rest of the evening, along with the slower moving hum of my thoughts. I got home and poured myself a glass of wine, sank into my couch, and turned on a show that I knew would soothe my restless brain. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found that subreddit I frequented. As I typed out my experiences, framing it just right to elicit some feedback, I felt a tide of hope. Maybe I wasn't an asshole for wanting respect, but even writing those words out made me realize the complexity of it all. We are social creatures, but we often forget that the cost of fitting in can sometimes be the highest price of all. The next day, I entered the office, buoyed by the feedback I'd already received from various users on Reddit. Many encouraged me to keep being true to myself, while others raised valid points that got me thinking. Maybe with subtlety rather than outright honesty, there could be a middle ground. Just then, I spotted Liam at the far corner of the break room, isolated but not entirely alone. He was talking to Sarah, an old friend of mine from another department. My heart sank slightly. Was this the moment we should talk about what happened? I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to address it like adults? I noticed Sarah laugh at something he said, and with it came a twinge of jealousy I didn't know I had. Suddenly, I craved closure, but I wouldn't allow myself to be the one to initiate it. My ego clashed with my desire for peace, but as I moved to pour a cup of coffee, I caught Liam's eye. He smirked, and something shifted inside me, something dark lifted, and instead of feeling anger, I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Maybe he was just navigating his way through this strange office dynamic as I was. I took a sip of my coffee, suddenly deciding that I wouldn't avoid him anymore. Maybe once bitten, twice shy, but I was done living like the awkward chess piece caught between an unyielding game. For better or worse, the echoes of that night still lingered, but instead of defining what I did wrong, they ignited a new curiosity. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt lighter, braced by the possibilities that lay ahead. After all, if I could be strong enough to voice my dislike, then maybe I could also find the courage to create new connections. I smiled softly at the thought, understanding now that growth often springs from the messy and uncomfortable feelings we try to push aside. It was about time for all of us to step up or move aside. As the days passed, I started noticing little shifts around me that reflected my newfound resolve. I interacted with coworkers I had previously ignored, the ones whose small talk seemed trivial in the shadow of my ex-coworkers' drama. Each interaction was a gentle electric charge, awakening a part of me that had long felt dormant. One afternoon, during a lunch break that felt too quiet, I joined a few colleagues who usually sat at a different table. They were discussing a recent movie, laughter punctuating their conversation. Without thinking much, I chimed in with my own take on it, surprised at how easily my words flowed. They welcomed my input as if I had always belonged there, and with each laugh shared, my confidence grew. I began to realize that I could carve out my space without pretending to be someone I wasn't. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had to navigate the aftermath of that confrontation with my ex-coworker, Julian. Word had spread through the office grapevine. I could almost feel the unspoken questions pulsing in the air whenever I passed by my old teammates. Did you really say that? You called him out? I felt their curiosity like heat against my skin, and sometimes it was unsettling. One morning, I found a message from Julian, through an app we once used to communicate during work. His words were careful and almost businesslike. Can we talk? I'd like to clear the air. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. On one hand, I wanted to dismiss him completely, unwilling to reopen that wound. Still, a part of me felt compelled to understand what he might say. Maybe he was genuinely sorry, or maybe he'd warped the narrative to cast himself as the victim. Deciding to meet felt like a reckless gamble. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted him at a corner table, his posture almost defensive, hands clasped tightly over his coffee cup. I chose not to sit opposite him and instead settled into the chair next to him, creating a barrier, perhaps as a quiet reminder that this space we had once shared had fundamentally changed. Julian opened with a hesitant compliment about my courage during that night. "I wasn't expecting you to say anything, honestly," he said, and I sensed a mixture of surprise and irritation in his tone. "People usually just let me walk over them." I couldn't help but scoff, the sound escaping before I could rein it in. "You know, you've made a habit of stomping on others to get ahead. Maybe that's why no one stood up to you before." The challenge hung in the air, and our eyes locked, a shared moment of confrontation that felt strangely invigorating. His expression shifted, caught between irritation and a hint of self-awareness. "I didn't realize I was coming off like that," he said slowly, as if genuinely processing my words. We continued to talk, the tension ebbing and flowing, dissecting the past while carefully avoiding reliving it. I could still sense the defensive walls he held up, but there were flickers of vulnerability, almost like he was testing the waters to see if I would lash out again. We spoke for nearly an hour, and I found myself, surprisingly, feeling some degree of empathy for him. Here was a person who, despite his shortcomings, was human and complex. We parted ways that day without any grand gestures of reconciliation, just a simple nod of recognition that we had laid a few cards on the table. As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much my decisions had shifted the dynamics of my workplace, taking the first step toward forging a community that felt less about keeping up appearances and more about honest connections. It opened doors to deeper conversations infused with real understanding. I found myself surrounded by allies rather than competitors, and we collaborated on projects with a synergy I had never experienced before. Reflecting on that night now, I can't help but marvel at how a single act of clarity and confrontation, however messy it was, laid the groundwork for a healthier environment. Sometimes we must be uncomfortable to unearth the beauty in our connections. Julian sent an unexpected message weeks later, just a single thumbs-up emoji after I presented a project idea we both worked on. I chuckled at how far we'd come, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There's strength in authenticity, I realized, and I was finally ready to embrace it.
You know, they say that when a relationship crumbles, it's like watching a slow-motion train wreck. You stand there, helpless, unable to intervene. I remember the day everything changed, the moment I became a shadow of the woman I used to be. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the slats of the blinds, casting jagged lines across our living room floor. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the distant laughter of children playing in the street, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside my own home. His name is Jake. I can't say it without a bitter taste in my mouth, like I've swallowed a mouthful of ash. He was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, ambitious, with the kind of smile that could light up the darkest corners of my mind. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, but, as it turns out, flames burn, and he was a fire that consumed everything in its path. The first few months were a whirlwind of romance. Candlelit dinners, spontaneous road trips, promises whispered under the stars. But it wasn't long before the shine began to fade, revealing the jagged edges of his personality. I should have seen the signs. The way his laughter could morph into anger in the blink of an eye, how he often blamed others for his shortcomings, especially when it came to me. It began with little jabs, a slight criticism here, a dismissive comment there. I laughed them off, convincing myself that he was just passionate, that he cared deeply. But then the cracks widened, and I found myself tiptoeing around his moods, like a soldier navigating a minefield. And then came the betrayal. The moment that shattered whatever illusion of safety I had left. I'll never forget the gut-wrenching feeling of checking his phone, my heart pounding like a war drum. I wasn't the type to snoop. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. But there it was, a name, a message, an intimate conversation that shattered the fragile remnants of my heart. Jessica. That name echoed in my mind like a death knell, piercing through the layers of denial I had wrapped around myself. I confronted him, my voice trembling, my hands shaking. His face twisted in a mask of feigned innocence, and I could see it, the flicker of amusement in his eyes, as if I were a child caught in a game I didn't even know we were playing. The argument escalated, and I felt the familiar sting of his words, dripping with condescension and disdain. "You're lucky to have me," he spat, "no one else would put up with your drama." That was the moment I realized, I was not just a victim of infidelity, I was ensnared in an abusive cycle that left me gasping for air. What's worse, I had become a stranger to myself, a mere reflection in the mirror, unable to recognize the woman staring back. But amidst the despair, something ignited in me, a flicker of defiance that was all too familiar. You see, this story is not just about a love lost, it's about the awakening of a fierce spirit that refuses to be crushed. I won't reveal everything just yet, there are darker layers to this tale, and trust me, you'll want to hear them. But know this, revenge is a dish best served cold, and I was ready to make it a feast. The days following the confrontation with Jake felt like a chaotic whirlwind, each moment dragging me deeper into an abyss of confusion and heartbreak. I still replayed that day in my mind, a broken record of his mocking laughter, and the way he had twisted my feelings into knots I couldn't untangle. I remember pacing the small apartment we had shared, the walls closing in around me as I tried to comprehend what had happened. How could he do this to me? Was I so blind? The nagging questions clawed at my insides, tearing away at the remnants of my self-worth. I was thrust into a reality where love morphed into betrayal, where the man I had cherished became a specter of deceit. "You're lucky to have me," he had said, and those words echoed into the depths of my soul, a poison that seeped into my thoughts. I found myself caught in a sick cycle of disbelief. I would wake up each morning, momentarily free from the weight of betrayal, only to remember the messages I had seen, her flirty texts, the way they spoke about me in hushed tones, as if I was an afterthought in a story they were both writing. I started to document everything. I was the detective in my own tragic love story, piecing together clues that painted a picture I was both desperate to understand and terrified to believe. I discovered more, photos of them at coffee shops, arms draped around each other, smiles that could rival the fake ones Jake had given me in the good days. How had I not noticed how his phone buzzed more often when he was around her? Or how his laughter was more genuine with her than it ever was with me? Those realizations cut like a knife, each one another wound I had to carry. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, tears streaming down my cheeks as I clutched my phone, the screen illuminated with evidence of my own heartbreak. I found myself returning to that same spot on the floor, day after day, feeling more like a prisoner in my own life. The flashes of anger were new to me, anger at him, at her, but mostly at myself for allowing it to happen. I would stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for the woman I used to be, the one who laughed easily and danced freely without a ghost of betrayal lurking behind her. Instead, I saw someone shattered, fragments of my identity scattered like broken glass. And then, there was the ever-deafening silence. I began to notice how Jake's rage manifested when I refused to engage with him after the confrontation. His anger boiled over like a pot left to simmer for too long. I felt it in the weight of his presence, the way he would loom over me, demanding attention, as if I owed him my unwavering loyalty despite the reality of his infidelity. "You're being dramatic," he would say, dismissing my pain with a wave of his hand, and each dismissive word stung like a fresh slap in the face. I began to withdraw, step by step, night by night, feeling the energy drain from me as I became increasingly aware of the emotional manipulation surrounding me. I was fighting to survive in this toxic atmosphere, where my heartbreak was reduced to a mere annoyance. Confusion turned to anger, anger ignited an ember of rage. The idea of revenge simmered quietly, but it felt like a distant dream, something to hold on to as I grappled with the injustice of it all. The deeper I dug into his betrayal, the more I uncovered, a tangled web of lies that had been spun around my once innocent heart. Each new discovery felt like a fresh wound, reopening the scars I was desperately trying to heal. I started replaying every moment, every conversation we had, searching for signs I had missed, desperate to understand how I had ended up here. The laughter we shared now felt laced with poison, and every tender gesture felt like a cruel joke. I remember one evening vividly, the sky bruised with dusk as I sat alone at a local cafe, pretending to sip my lukewarm coffee. I scrolled through my phone, numb to the world around me, when I saw it, a selfie Jake had posted with Jessica. They were beaming, Faces inches apart, the smile on his lips told a story that my heart couldn't bear to decipher. The caption read, "Living my best life with my favorite person." My stomach churned as embarrassment washed over me. I felt exposed, like I was standing naked in front of an audience while everyone pointed and laughed. I wasn't just the jilted lover, I was the punchline to a joke I had never asked to be a part of. Amidst that crushing humiliation, I felt the sting of isolation creeping in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Friends began to notice my withdrawn demeanor. I could see their concerned glances, their whispered conversations, but I couldn't bear to share my pain. I felt like a burden, and the shame of my situation chained me to silence. The happy hours turned into awkward meetings where I forced smiles while my insides rotted away. I felt like a ghost, drifting through the remnants of my social life while Jake continued to flaunt his new relationship, unbothered by the wreckage he had left behind. Jake's friends, once my friends too, began to side with him. When I shared snippets of my hurt, I was met with patronizing chuckles and reassurances that he's just a guy being a guy. Their dismissive tone ignited a fire within me, intensifying my sense of betrayal. I found myself yearning for the company of those who understood my pain, but instead, I was met with indifferent nods and pitying eyes. I felt like the villain in my own story, a pariah in a world that once embraced me. The isolation reached a peak when I decided to confront my best friend, Sarah. I confided in her about everything, hoping for a shred of support. But what I got instead was an uncomfortable silence, followed by her hesitant admonishment of my actions. "You shouldn't have gone through this phone," she said softly, as if I were the guilty party. I felt my heart sink, crushed under the weight of her judgment. It was as if the walls were closing in, trapping me in a reality where even my closest allies were turning their backs, leaving me to fend for myself in an endless night of despair. It was during one of those long nights, tossing and turning in bed, that I started to plot my revenge. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, the rage I had suppressed for so long finally forcing its way out. I envisioned the moment I would confront him, my fists clenched, my heart racing with the adrenaline of betrayal turned into power. But it would take time and cunning. I would need to be strategic. I needed something concrete, a way to turn the tables, a way to make them feel the weight of their actions. As the days turned into weeks, a plan began to form in my mind. I started to gather evidence, screenshots of their conversations, photos of their time together, anything I could use against him. With the flickering light of my laptop illuminating my darkened room, I felt a surge of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. I was no longer just a passive victim, I was a woman on a mission, and it felt exhilarating. The turning point came on an ordinary Friday night. I had been up late, scrolling through social media when I stumbled upon a post from Jake, shared publicly for the world to see. It was a photo of him and Jessica at a lavish party, their arms intertwined, grinning like they had just conquered the world. I could feel my heart drop into the pit of my stomach as I read the comments from his friends, lauding him for his catch. I was shaking with a mix of sorrow and rage, and I slammed my laptop shut, the sound echoing throughout the silent room. That's when it hit me like a thunderbolt. I was done being the punchline in their twisted little love story. I looked around my dimly lit space, the remnants of our shared life cluttered in corners, photos of happier times staring back at me. My eyes landed on something that sent a chill down my spine, the framed picture of us at the beach, full of laughter, capturing a moment when I actually believed in our love. In that instant, the memory of his last words seeped in, echoing like a taunting chorus in my mind, "You're lucky to have me." No, I was done feeling lucky. I would take back my power. I needed to show him that his actions had consequences, that I was not just some side character in their story. I was the protagonist, and it was time to write my own ending. Fueled by adrenaline, I sprang into action. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the pictures I had saved. Each image I had collected felt like a tiny victory, a stepping stone towards my freedom. I meticulously organized the evidence, screenshots of his text exchanges, the photos of their outings, all the little moments he had shared publicly while he had me masked in the shadows. I could feel the heat of determination rising within me as I created a folder, labeling it with a name that made me smirk, Jake's True Colors. But the plan needed more than just evidence. I needed a way to weave the truth into a narrative that would hit them both where it hurt, their carefully curated images of happiness. The idea crystallized in my mind like ice forming on still water. I would confront him, but not just for myself. I would expose him to everyone who had been fooled by his charm, a public acknowledgement of his deceit. I envisioned sending an anonymous message to his friends, sharing the evidence and revealing the facade he had created. The final straw came when I overheard him on the phone one evening, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. I stood frozen behind a half-closed door, my heart racing as he bragged to someone about how I was too emotional to ever leave him. It was as if every fiber of my being was ignited by indignation. The reality of my situation became crystal clear. He had built a narrative around me, one that painted me as unstable and needy, while he strutted around as the misunderstood hero. At that moment, I realized I was done being afraid. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface erupted like a volcano, and all my fears melted away into determination. I would not just confront Jake, I would dismantle his carefully crafted illusion. I would take back my narrative, and I would do it on my own terms. I felt a rush of exhilaration as I plotted. I would gather this is where my detailed plan began to take shape, a meticulous blueprint designed not just to sting, but to dismantle the very foundation Jake had built his new relationship upon. It was time to flip the script, and I was ready to play my part. Here's how I envisioned it all unfolding. Step 1, evidence collection. I had already begun this process, but it was time to go all in. I meticulously scoured my phone for every shred of evidence that could help me. Screenshots of their flirty text exchanges, Instagram posts, Snapchat stories, they all went into their own folder titled Jake's True Colors. I wanted to ensure I had not just proof of his infidelity, but also material that highlighted his manipulation. I had to be careful not to draw attention to myself. I didn't want Jake to grow suspicious as I gathered this information. It meant I had to act naturally, engaging with my friends and maintaining a facade, even as I plotted in secret. Step 2, assemble my team. I needed allies who understood my plight and could help me execute my plan. I reached out to 2 close friends, Mia and Alex, people who had witnessed the unraveling of my relationship firsthand. Over coffee, I laid out my plan, showing them the evidence I had amassed. Their shock quickly transformed into support, and I could see the fire igniting within them too. Would they be willing to risk their friendship with Jake? I feared they might hesitate, wrestling with loyalties. But when I recounted the ways he had dismissed my pain and manipulated our circle, they were ready to back me up. Step 3, the social media setup. At this stage, I knew that the best way to expose Jake was through social media, his playground. I created a fake account using an alias that was just plausible enough to be believed. Armed with my collection of damning evidence, I began crafting a series of messages that would strategically unveil the truth to his friends. The messages would be timed to hit right when they were active, utilizing a mix of screenshots and personal anecdotes about my relationship with Jake. "Hey, I thought you all should know what your friend has been up to." I could almost hear his heart dropping when he realized it would be impossible to silence me. There was a risk of being unmasked. If Jake or Jessica managed to trace the account back to me, my entire plan could blow up in my face. I had to be cautious, carefully curating my posts and keeping my anonymity intact. Step 4, the confrontation. The next phase was the nerve-wracking confrontation. I decided I would wait for the weekend when he would be out with friends, soaking in the glow of his new relationship. I planned to show up at a bar where they often hung out, armed with my evidence, ready to unveil the truth not just to him, but to a crowd of people who had been deceived. When the moment came, I would create a commotion, drawing attention to myself. I envisioned Jake's face when he saw me, the disbelief washing over him as I pulled out my phone, displaying the incriminating screenshots of his exchanges with Jessica. "Is this who you wanted to be?" I would demand, my voice steady despite the tremor of rage bubbling within me. "This is who you really are." There was a chance he wouldn't react as I hoped. He might try to downplay my accusations or spin the narrative to make me look crazy. I had to prepare myself for every possible outcome, ensuring I could maintain control over the situation. Climax, the execution of revenge. The night arrived, thick with tension. I slipped into a black dress that hugged my figure, a symbol of my regained confidence. I took a deep breath, ensuring my phone was tucked away, screenshots ready to unleash. The dim lights of the bar flickered above me as I scanned the room, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I spotted him immediately, Jake, laughter erupting from his lips, Jessica's hand intertwined with his. They looked like a perfect couple, and it made my stomach churn. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I fought through the waves of anxiousness and made my way towards them, my friends Mia and Alex trailing slightly behind. The closer I got, the more I focused on the fury that had been building within me, a fire that had simmered for far too long. As I approached, I caught the glimmer of surprise on Jake's face when he spotted me. I could see the moment he realized something was off, his laughter faltered, and his smile faded. Jessica's face twisted in confusion, a shadow of doubt flickering in her eyes. I cleared my throat, a smile plastered on my face that felt more like a snarl. "Jake," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "We need to talk." He blinked, disbelieving, glancing at Jessica, who looked ready to burst with curiosity. "What are you doing here?" He stammered, feigning nonchalance. "Just wanted to remind you of who you really are," I replied, pulling out my phone and holding it up for everyone to see. "You remember these, don't you?" I scrolled through the evidence I had meticulously collected, each screenshot illuminating the truth like a flash of light in a dark room. I could see the color drain from his face. The bar, once filled with laughter, began to fall silent. Faces turned towards us, drawn in like moths to a flame, curious about the unfolding drama. My friends stood back, watching, ready to support me, and I felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The tension was electric, vibrating through the crowd. Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, but his forced bravado didn't mask the tremor in his voice. I continued scrolling, flipping through the text that showcased his betrayal. "Can't wait for our date next week?" I read aloud, my tone dripping with mockery. Or how about, "You make me feel alive like she never could." Sound familiar? Each word was a dagger, aimed not just at him but at the facade he had created. Gasps echoed around me, and I felt the weight of all those eyes on us, every eager listener drawn deeper into the chaos unfolding before them. I could see the confusion on Jessica's face morphing into anger, her trust unraveling with every word I spoke. "Look," Jake began, his voice rising in an attempt to regain control, "this is just a misunderstanding." "Is it?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "You think I'm the petty ex here? You've had me living in shadows while you paraded this lie around. You think I wouldn't find out?" My heart raced, but I pressed on, throwing every ounce of anguish I had bottled up back at him. "You're not just a liar, Jake. You're a coward." His face contorted, the anger within him flaring. The cacophony of shock and whispers erupted in the bar as I laid bare the truth, each revelation striking Jake like a tidal wave. The discomfort on his face was palpable, shifting from anger to bewilderment as he struggled to regain control of the narrative. I could see Jessica's eyes darting between us, the spark of doubt igniting her trust in him, and part of me relished the moment. The truth was a weapon, and I wielded it like a sword, cutting through the lies he had spun around us all. As the crowd began to murmur, I felt a sense of liberation washing over me, the years of fear and manipulation melting away like ice in the sun. The weight of my heartbreak felt lighter, replaced by the exhilarating rush of reclaiming my story. But in that moment of triumph, a dark realization pierced through the veil of my victory: the fallout wouldn't just affect him, it would ripple through our shared lives, dissecting friendships and revealing hidden loyalties. In the days that followed, the consequences began to unfold. Jake's rage erupted like a volcano, spewing venomous threats and desperate attempts to frame me as the instigator. "You're crazy. This is a false narrative," he shouted at me in a public confrontation the day after the bar incident, his face twisted in fury. But I stood my ground, my heart steady in the face of his wrath. I had unveiled his mask, I wouldn't let him put it back on. However, the reality began to shift like sand beneath my feet. Friends I thought were loyal started to distance themselves. Some unfollowed me on social media, while others sent me half-hearted messages asking for peace. It felt as though a rift had formed, a chasm that widened every time I heard laughter echoing from the group I had once felt a part of. Jake's influence was potent, He had filled their ears with his version of the narrative, a twisted tale that painted me as the villain in this saga. As I sat alone at home one evening, scrolling through the memories that lingered on my phone, I felt the shadows of isolation creep in again. The heavy cloak of loneliness wrapped around me, thicker than before. I had sought revenge, but now I was grappling with the emotional wreckage left in its wake. I found myself staring at the framed picture of us once again. The irony of it all didn't escape me. It was a reminder of who I had been, a woman that felt whole, loved, and cherished. The woman who was now an outcast. Surprisingly, it was during this time of solitude that I began to piece together what closure truly meant for me. Revenge had felt intoxicating, but it didn't fill the void of betrayal or mend the friendships that had splintered. I realized I didn't need to hold on to resentment, I could let it go. I began to channel my energy into healing instead, working out, journaling, attending therapy sessions where I could finally be heard without judgment. I surrounded myself with those who truly saw me for who I was, not who Jake had depicted. It was months later that I found myself unexpectedly running into Sarah, my best friend who had distanced herself after the fallout. In that moment, I was prepared for hostility, for her to return to the narrative Jake had spun, but instead, I felt a tremor of hope. She approached me, her head bowed, and with a shaky breath, she admitted, "I believed him, but I see it now. I should have stood by you." That moment of honesty touched a tender spot in my heart. I never thought I'd be here, pouring my heart out in the quiet solitude of my dimly lit living room, the remnants of my past flickering on the screen in front of me. It's the soft glow from my laptop that seems to draw out all the shadows lurking in the corners of my mind. The smell of burnt coffee clings to the air, my attempt at comfort, but it only stirs the bitter taste of what once was. It's funny, isn't it? How a single person can invade your life so deeply that even years later, they still have the power to pull the strings of your memory like a marionette moved by unseen hands. Let me take you back to that summer light, warm and inviting yet holding an undertone of something darker. I was 23, with freshly dyed auburn hair that glinted like the sun as I ran my fingers through it absent-mindedly. I had just moved to this bustling city, its pulse quickening with every honk and shout on the busy street below, the perfect backdrop for a new beginning. But it was then that I met Eric, our paths colliding like two meteors in a night sky. He was charming, with an easy smile and a laugh that could light up the darkest corners of my heart. For a while, everything felt perfect, tantalizingly sweet like the first sip of a summer lemonade. I remember the first time he whispered that he loved me, his breath warm against my ear, and how it felt like we were the only two people in the universe. But as the months rolled by, that intoxicating sweetness began to sour. Eric was the kind of guy who enjoyed chaos, a master of stirring the pot. Friends became mere pawns in his game, and I soon found myself caught in a whirlwind of jealousy and manipulation. I'd see him charming others, while I stood on the sidelines, feeling smaller with every smile he flashed at someone new. And then, after 2 years of emotional whiplash, we finally ended it, an inevitable explosion of hurt and words thrown like knives. I thought I would finally escape the chaos, the incessant drama that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. Little did I know, the remnants of our relationship would haunt me well into the years that followed. Even now, as I sit here, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, stirring the pot, crafting new tales that twist the truth into something unrecognizable. I thought I had moved on, but the reality of it all weighs heavily on my chest. I can't escape the tension that ripples through my life whenever I hear his name whispered in familiar circles, or when I see a mutual friend's post online, something casual that feels like a knife twisting in an old wound. I never wanted revenge, it was never in my plans. But as I map out the last few years in my head, I'm starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, it's the only way to reclaim my narrative. I can't let him roam free in my mind, planting seeds of doubt and chaos. I need a plan, and I need it to be clever, calculated, something that will finally put an end to his manipulations. Because we all know the truth, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I believe Eric is still that same master puppeteer, playing games, and I'm ready to cut the strings. The conflict didn't surface all at once, it was more like a slow unraveling, a gutting of everything I thought I understood about our relationship.
In the early days, Eric's charm was intoxicating, but soon it became a veil, hiding the chaos beneath. The small betrayals emerged like cracks in a once beautiful vase. I remember the first time I felt it, an oyster of doubt nestled in my stomach. We were at a party, surrounded by friends, laughter swirling around us like autumn leaves. I caught Eric's gaze lingering too long on another woman, her laughter drawing him in like a moth to a flame. I brushed it off, foolish jealousy, I told myself, but then I couldn't shake the feeling. Was it paranoia, or was there something to it? My nights grew restless, each tick of the clock amplifying my insecurities. Slowly, I began piecing together the small lies. An innocuous text he'd forgotten to delete. A change in his energy, like he was a stage actor slipping out of character. The way he'd tell stories about our adventures, embellishing them to seem more thrilling, as if he needed validation from others rather than me. Yet, every time I confronted him, he'd wrap me up in his words, his beguiling smile disarming my anger. "You know I only have eyes for you," he'd say, and I'd want to believe it. After all, love is blind, something I had learned the hard way. But the whispers grew louder, and soon enough, I couldn't ignore them. Friends began to pull away, their gazes heavy with unspoken truths. "Is something going on with Eric?" One of them asked cautiously one night, her brow furrowed with concern. It felt like a punch to the stomach. I remained silent, a mask of laughter plastered over my confusion. Yet, the truth was festering. I could sense it, he was painting me as the villain in his retelling of our story. I was the one who was too needy, the crazy one, while he was simply the misunderstood artist. The more I dug, the more it hurt. Then came the day of the final betrayal, the one that shattered the glass of my world. I stumbled upon his social media, a late-night scroll through the screen, and there it was, a picture of him, arms wrapped around another woman, laughter spilling from their lips, eyes sparkling with that same mischievous light he once reserved for me. The caption read, "Finding new adventures." My heart sank. I thought I was building a life with him, but this was a dagger to the heart. I had been right all along, hadn't I? The masquerade was over, the truth stripped bare, and there I was, left to grapple with the wreckage. My hands trembled as I replayed the moment over and over, trying to convince myself it was a cruel joke. But deep down, I knew it was real. Eric had moved on, and I was still trapped in the cage of our shared memories. The anger bubbled up, igniting a fire inside me that I had never felt before. How could he? Why would he twist the knife like this? Each betrayal thrummed through my veins, a reminder of the weeks I spent questioning my worth. I felt like the fool, duped by the very person who had promised me the universe. And there it was, the bitterness I had tried to ignore creeping up my throat. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to make him feel the same suffocating pain he had thrust upon me. But I couldn't just lash out, I needed to be strategic. The weeks turned into months, and I found myself falling deeper into an abyss of distrust. Friends I once confided in began to fade away, their silence heavy with judgment and the unspoken knowledge of his betrayals. Every time I reached for reassurance, all I got was pity, their eyes darting nervously as if I were the one with the problem. I felt like a pariah in my own life, suffocated by the weight of the world's expectations. The isolation gnawed at me, an incessant reminder that the bonds I thought were solid were little more than threads ready to snap. I couldn't turn to my friends because I was terrified they'd take his side or, worse, confirm the whispers I feared were true. I became a ghost in my own life, wandering through social gatherings, cloaked in forced smiles while the laughter felt like a distant echo. But then the humiliation hit an all-time low. It was a chance encounter that solidified my worst fears. I was at a coffee shop, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I heard that unmistakable laugh, his laugh, coming from behind me. My stomach knotted, and my pulse quickened as I turned to see him sitting there, grinning with that same charm, and holding hands with the woman from the photo. A punch of betrayal surged through my chest. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the floorboards, but instead, I froze. It was as if time had paused just for me to witness my own degradation. They were sharing a moment that mirrored ours, soft gazes, playful nudges, and I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, a wave of anger mixed with a feeling of utter worthlessness. As I awkwardly gathered my things, I could feel their eyes on me, could sense the judgment cascading silently between them. I spilled my drink everywhere, the cold brew soaking the floor and my shoes, an accident, but in that moment, it felt like a symbol of my life upended. I mumbled an apology, my cheeks flushed with both embarrassment and fury, and rushed out before I could hear their laughter echoing in my mind. That day was the tipping point. I became paranoid and suspicious, watching as the remnants of our shared circle of friends began to dwindle to mere acquaintances. I heard snippets of conversations that felt like they were directed at me, whispers about my crazy ex and how I should just let it go. The words stung, a reminder that Eric was still casting his spell, warping the narrative to fit his needs. It felt like a cruel cosmic joke. I had once built a life and shared a vision of the future with this person, but now I was an outcast in my own story. The shame of being portrayed as the villain made it impossible to trust anyone. Even the people I once considered allies began to retreat, their glances heavy with pity or judgment, and I couldn't help but think they were taking Eric's side without even knowing the full story. I began to lose myself, feeling like a ghost in my own skin, haunted by echoes of laughter that felt long gone. Friends who once texted just to check in started fading out, leaving me stranded like driftwood in a sea of betrayal. The isolation crept deeper, wrapping around me like an anchor, dragging me down into a darkness I couldn't escape. But one night, while scrolling through old photos in a fit of nostalgia, I stumbled upon a video of Eric and me at a concert, the way his arm was wrapped around me, my laughter ringing out like a melody. We looked so happy, so in love. But as I watched, something shifted deep within me. That moment was long gone, and the person in that video felt like a stranger now. I could no longer ignore the gnawing need for closure, for an end to the chaos he had brought into my life. And then it hit me, the night of the coffee shop encounter had been the catalyst, but this was the ignition point, the moment of clarity. I didn't want to be haunted by memories any longer. I wanted to reclaim my narrative, to take back what he had stolen from me, my confidence, my peace, my story. I was tired of being seen as the villain in a story I didn't choose to write. In that moment, I made my decision. I wouldn't just fade into the background, I would rise from the ashes of this betrayal and write my own ending. I envisioned a plan, a strategy that wouldn't just brush him aside but would make him realize the repercussions of his actions. This wouldn't be some petty revenge, it would be a lesson, a powerful reminder that those who play with hearts can't do so without consequences. I started mapping out my plan carefully, with the precision of a chess player. The tools were all around me, my knowledge of his habits, the friends still loyal to me, those who had witnessed his manipulation firsthand. I remembered their faces in moments of doubt, their concern etched deeply in their expressions. They felt it too, I wasn't alone in this. I reached out to a couple of friends, the ones I trusted most, and began sowing the seeds of my revenge. They were slow to catch on to my intentions, but as I laid out the pieces, they saw the vision I had for my future and the urgency behind it. I wasn't lashing out in anger, I was reclaiming my power, forcing him to confront the chaos he had orchestrated, the narratives he had spun that painted me in a light I didn't deserve. I gathered evidence, screenshots of texts, photos, and memories that showcased a different story. Eric had painted me as the irrational one, but I would turn the tide and show everyone the real master, manipulator. I began crafting a narrative of my own, one that would highlight his deceit and paint the truth across our shared circle. Every day, the old emotions felt less like chains and more like fuel. The anxiety I had felt before evolved into determination, and for the first time in years, I found myself smiling, a genuine smile, one that came from a place of empowerment, not victimhood. I refused to be the fool any longer. The turning point had ignited something within me, an ember that burned fiercely against the shadows of my past. As the pieces began to fall into place, I felt the weight of my plan settle comfortably on my shoulders. This was not about just revenge, it was about transformation. It was about shedding the layers of hurt and anger and rising anew, a phoenix born from the ashes of betrayal. I would confront him, not with chaos or anger, but with the calm assurance of someone who had finally reclaimed their narrative. And as I plotted my revenge, I couldn't help but feel exhilarated. Eric wouldn't see it coming. He was still lost in his web of lies, blissfully unaware that the very thing he had tried to destroy was rising again, stronger and more determined than ever. This was only the beginning. As I sat on my couch, the shadows from the flickering screen casting distortions across the walls, I felt a surge of clarity. Revenge wasn't about chaos, it was about precision and strategy. I had been a pawn in Eric's game for far too long, and now it was time to flip the board. I meticulously crafted a plan that felt both liberating and intoxicating. Here it is, step by step. Step 1, gather evidence, the hunt for truth. I started a meticulous collection of evidence that highlighted Eric's manipulation. This included screenshots of texts exchanged between him and mutual friends, along with any incriminating posts he had made on social media that hinted at his less than honorable behavior. I also reached out to friends I had confidence in, those who'd seen his true colors and were willing to confirm my side of the story. The scavenger network. I created a secret group chat with my inner circle, ensuring we could communicate without the risk of Eric catching wind of our discussions. Each friend would be tasked with gathering intel about Eric's recent escapades, something to paint a clearer picture of his continued chaos. It was like building a small army, fortifying my side with the truth. Step 2, the social media trap. Revamping my profile. I took a deep breath and revamped my social media profiles. I made them vibrant and filled with joy, showcasing my newfound happiness and independence. This wasn't just about showing Eric what he lost, it was also a way to lure him into a false sense of security. I knew he'd be keeping tabs on me, and I wanted him to think I was moving on effortlessly, planting subtle seeds. As my posts gained traction, I began to subtly plant information about my new pursuits, hobbies, travels, and accomplishments, things that would catch his eye and stir jealousy. I made sure my friends engaged with these posts, commenting about how I was thriving without him. It was all part of the ruse. Step 3, the confrontation setup. The event. I decided to host a small gathering, nothing too extravagant, just a few close friends who could help me orchestrate this encounter. I sent out invites to include some of Eric's friends, knowing that he would want to come. I needed him to walk into a carefully laid trap, where the truth would unravel like a tapestry before his eyes. The accidental meeting. I strategically planned for my closest ally to invite Eric specifically. Their connection would serve as the catalyst for him to attend. I wanted him to feel comfortable, akin to the days when we'd all hang out freely, blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. Step 4, the reveal. The night of reckoning. On the night of the gathering, I ensured the atmosphere was light and fun. The laughter around me would be the perfect cover for the tension building beneath the surface. I enlisted friends to casually drop hints about past events, things Eric had twisted, comments he'd made about me, moments I'd felt betrayed, the evidence revelation. As the evening wore on and drinks flowed, I subtly slipped into conversation the evidence I had gathered. I could see Eric's demeanor shift as my friends began to piece together the narrative he had crafted, revealing the truth behind the facade he had maintained. Step 5, the final blow. Confronting him. At the height of the night, I planned to confront Eric directly. I would take a deep breath, channeling every ounce of confidence I had cultivated over the past months. The air was thick with laughter and conversation, yet I felt oddly detached, as if I were floating above the chaos, surveying the territory. The instant he walked through the door, I felt a jolt of adrenaline rush through me. Eric, always so effortlessly magnetic, greeted everyone with that same charming smile that used to make my heart race. He was oblivious to the storm brewing under the surface. As he made his way through the crowd, greeting old friends, I could see the hint of confusion etched into his expression as he noticed the awkward glances exchanged among our mutual friends. I let the moment linger, watching as he sunk deeper into the trap we had set, all the while maintaining my smile. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and I could feel my heart pounding to the rhythm of the impending confrontation. Finally, when the noise reached a peak, I stepped forward. "Hey, everyone," I called out, my voice cutting through the laughter like a knife through silence. "Can I have your attention for just a moment? I have something important to discuss." The room quieted, all eyes landing on me. I could see Eric's brow furrow slightly. He sensed something was off. I took a deep breath, locking eyes with him, my heart pounding in anticipation. "Eric," I said, my tone deceptively light, "it's so nice to see you again. It's been too long." The words dripped with sweetness, masking the underlying tension like a thin layer of icing over a bitter cake. He smiled, but there was hesitation behind it, a flicker of uncertainty that sent a shiver of satisfaction through me. Yeah, it really has. Things have changed a lot. Changed? I echoed, drawing the attention of our friends closer. You mean like how you've been busy spreading lies about me? Or is it the fact that you've been busy moving on with someone else while I was still picking up the pieces of my heart after you shattered it? Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I could see Eric's face turn pale, his smile faltering as the weight of my words hung in the air. Are you really going to do this here? He asked, his voice low, almost pleading, as he tried to regain control of the situation. But the moment had passed, and I could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed facade. Yes, I am, I replied, my voice steady, gaining strength with every word. Because I'm done being the villain in your story. I'm here to share a different perspective, one that highlights the chaos you've inflicted on me and others. I gestured toward our friends, their faces filled with a mixture of sympathy and shock. Did you really think you could keep spinning your narrative without anyone questioning the truth? I continued, my pulse racing. Did you think I wouldn't fight back? And then, I pulled out my phone, the screen illuminating with the evidence I had gathered. Here's a collection of your messages. Texts to friends where you belittled me, where you turned me into the crazy ex that everyone whispers about. I held the phone up, letting the group see the screen. Remember when you told Maria that I was too clingy? Or how you had the audacity to say you were just trying to help me when all you did was dismantle my self-worth? I locked eyes with Eric, refusing to look away. I was not the problem. You were the after the truth spilled out like the wine that had once been our shared laughter. The room fell into an eerie silence, thick with tension. I could feel the collective breath of my friends, the weight of their gazes pressing down on Eric. Every word I had painstakingly crafted hung in the air, echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. This was it, the reckoning, the moment I had longed for, but never truly believed would come. Eric's reaction was immediate, his face shifted from shock to anger in a heartbeat. You're making a huge mistake, he hissed, his voice low, yet laced with desperation. I could see the mask of charm slipping, revealing the chaotic energy I'd grown so familiar with, the master manipulator caught off guard, unable to weave a new narrative in this moment. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I felt liberated, empowered. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my story, my life. As I stood there, my heart racing, a sense of purpose washed over me, drowning out the fear that had once held me captive. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Eric, I declared, my voice steady. You've been spinning your tale for too long, and I refuse to be the scapegoat for your insecurities. I deserve to be seen, truly seen, by my friends, by those who matter. The crowd shifted, murmurs of disbelief and sympathy rippling through the group. I could feel the support surrounding me, bolstering my confidence, and Eric shrank under the weight of my words. The truth was a powerful force, and I had finally harnessed it. I continued, let me remind you of how many hearts you've toyed with, how many lives you've manipulated, all while playing the innocent boy next door. Friends here have seen it, felt it, just as I have. You think you're untouchable, but tonight, you're the one exposed. With each revelation, I watched as my friends exchanged glances, recognition dawning in their eyes. They began to piece together the puzzle Eric had long distorted, suddenly understanding the narrative from my perspective rather than the caricature he had painted. The laughter from before had turned into an uncomfortable tension, and I could see the cracks in Eric's facade deepen. One of my friends, Mia, stepped forward, her voice steady. I've seen it too, Eric. The way you twist stories, how you manipulate people. It's not okay. Her words were like a ripple effect, giving others permission to speak out, to embrace their truths. Eric's face flushed, his charisma fading into something unrecognizable. You're all just, he started, but the words faltered, his voice trembling as the realization set in. He was losing control. The crowd wasn't there to support him anymore, they were rallying around me, the one he had tried to vilify. I felt a rush of gratitude and solidarity, each supportive voice pulling me back from the brink of my past insecurities. I thought I was the one who needed to apologize, I said, letting my gaze linger on Eric, but it seems the table has turned. I'm here to take back my voice, my power, and my story. The air was electric, charged with the simultaneous release of tension and the dawning clarity of my friend's realizations. I had transformed from a shadow of my former self into a beacon of truth, shining brightly in the dark shadows Eric had tried so hard to cast over me. In that moment, something shifted. I could see the fear in.
It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscence of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment.